Is the difference between for in and for of. The goals for this particular module are to look at a for in statement and a for of statement and talk about the difference between those two. We'll also take a look at the break statement, continue, and labeled statements. Let's get started. Let's start out looking at the for in statement, which iterates over the elements of an object. And these are the properties and the methods. Now, each time through the loop, it's going to return the key or the property or method name. You can then use that object and then use the square brackets with the key name that you get back inside of it, and that will return the value to you. Let's take a look at using the for in loop. On line 9, you can see a button that calls a for in sample. This sample function is down here on line 15. Now you see on line 16 through 26, I declare a literal object called product, and inside of that I have several properties such as product ID, name, product number. I then have a method called calculate gross profit. Now, if we take a look down here on lines 28 through 30, you see a for loop. The key here is that we use this in keyword. So we're saying for constant key in product. So the in says iterate over the collection of properties and methods inside of this literal object called product and return the key to me. Now you can see on line 29, I can spit out the key, and I can access the product and use that subscript, right? The square brackets key, which is a subscript into that to retrieve the value. Let's go ahead and run this. Bring up our F12 tools here and click on the button. So you can see product ID is the key and then it's equal to 680. So we're reporting the actual property name and the value. Then look at the very bottom here where we have calculate gross profit. So it actually returns the method to us and shows us the body of the method as well. So this is a for in loop. Let's take a look at a for of loop. What this one does is iterates over the values in any iterable object, such as an array or a string. It returns then an object for each iteration. What the object is depends on the type of object you're iterating over. Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. We'll do a normal for of where we iterate over an array, and then we will actually loop over a string. On line 9, I have a button that calls a function called for of sample. If we scroll down and we take a look, here's this simple little function on lines 42 to 46. What we're going to do is iterate over an array of products, and that's declared right here. Let underscore products equal to an array, and it's an array of objects. So I've got a couple of different product objects here. On line 43, we say for constant item of, so we're using the of keyword now. So the of says, hey, let's now iterate over this iterable object, which in this case is an array. So each time through the loop, it's going to place each item of the array into that constant called item. And then on line 44, I'm simply going to do a console.log. I'll do a json.stringify so we can output that as a string, that object as a string to the console. Let's go ahead and view this in our default browser. Bring up the F12 tools, and there we can see the iteration over the array of 3 items, each time through the loop, spitting out the stringified value of that object into the console. Our next example now loops over a string. So on line 9, I've got a button which, when clicked, calls loop string sample. That function is on line 15. Inside of this function on line 16, I let product name equal to, and then you can see this string of characters here. And then I also have another let on line 17, letters equal empty string. What we're going to do is we're going to loop through now for constant character of product name. So it's treating the string now as an iterable object. So each time through, it's going to be a single character of the string. We're then going to take that character and add it to the letters variable that I've created, and at the very end on line 22, we'll spit out letters. Let's go ahead and view this in the default browser here. Bring up our console, and basically what we get back is the same string. The difference is we iterated over that string one character at a time. You probably won't do this too much, but it's nice to know that a string is an iterable object. Let's take a look at two other statements that you might use in combination with looping. First one is break. Now we've seen break before. That was in the context of the switch statement. In this case, what break does is leaves a loop early. The other statement you might use is continue. And continue will let you go back up to the top of the loop and continue with the next iteration, bypassing any code below the continue. Let's take a look at these two demos of break and continue. Our first example is a break. I still have the same products array, but down here now you can see the function break sample. I'm going to now use the for loop, and I'm going to do a for of because I'm iterating over an array of product objects. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check inside of the for loop. I'm going to do an if statement to check to see if the standard cost is less than 20. If it is, I will break out of the loop, which means it skips any other statements below the break. On line 47, what we're going to do each time through the loop is do a console.log on the json.stringify of the item, but once the standard cost is less than 20, we will break out of the loop. Let's take a look up here, and we see that the first standard cost on line 20 is $1,059. But then on line 28, the standard cost is $1,308. So it should skip the last two items in the array. Let's open this up in our default browser, bring up the F12 tools, and we see that indeed we do just get the first object and then the rest of the loop is broken out of. The continue statement in our continue sample, if we take a look at this function, this one is kind of the opposite of break. What this one will do is go back up to the top of the loop and continue with the iteration, but still skip any lines below it. So just like the break skipped any lines, this one also skips them, but the difference is it goes back to the top of the loop and continues. So on this one, inside of our for loop, we have an if statement that checks to see if the standard cost of that product object is greater than 1,000, and if it does, it says continue. So the first one is definitely over 1,000, so it will not perform line 47. Instead, it will go to the top, get the next item, and then continue. Let's go ahead and open this up in our default browser. We'll bring up our F12 tools, click on continue, and we should see only two products get reported. The first one is skipped. The last statement I'm going to cover here is called a labeled statement. And what this does is define a location to go to. Now, anybody who remembers the old basic days of go to, you know this was a very bad idea. It's still a bad idea in JavaScript. It's not recommended for use, but I wanted to show it to you just for completeness, and because you never know, you may inherit some code where somebody actually did this. So you know not to use it, but somebody else may not know. Let's take a look at a labeled statement. On line 9, we have a button that calls a function called Labelecment. So here's the function Labelecment on line 16. And then notice on line 17, there's something with a colon after it. Now, we've only seen that in case statements before, but this is actually a label. A label is whatever name you want, I call it even, with a colon after it. What I'm going to do is loop through from 1 to 10, but I'm going to check that index number every single time and see if it divides evenly by 2. If it does, then we do continue even. When you put a label after the continue statement, it doesn't go to the top of the loop, it actually goes to that label. It then drops back into the loop and continues on. So what this will do is report back only the even numbers. So let's go ahead and click on this and we should see just the even numbers appear. So as you can see, a goto is not a very good construct to use. It leads to spaghetti code. You kind of never know where you're going to go back to. There's always a way to refactor your code so that you never have to use a labeled statement. In this module, we took a look at some specialized for loops for iteration. We used a for in for iterating over objects' properties and methods, and we used for of for any other iterable object such as arrays or strings. We saw how the break and continue statements help us control the flow of a for loop, and we learned that a label is a go-to mechanism, and again we should avoid this at all costs. Coming up in the next module, we'll talk about math and comparison operators, and we'll find out what that use strict statement really does in your JavaScript functions. I hope you'll join me for the next